everyone. Today we are going to present you the result of our research on nurses' experiences of caring for people with ALS at end of life, a Canadian qualitative study. The teams declare no conflict of interest in connection with this presentation. And if you want more information on the result or the method, you can find it on the hyperlink presented on screen to have the full article. The study objectives were to explore the experiences of nurse caring for people with ALS at the end of life. The study objective came from a clinical problem encountered on the field, and the aim were to have a better understanding of the problematic that nurses encounter in end-of-life care with ALS, and to offer better care for people with ALS at the end of life. The method was a 50-minute interview one-on-one with nurses working in a hospital, home care, or hospices. The participants were a total of 24. 8 came from hospital, 7 from palliative care home, and 9 from home care. Most of them identifying as women in age between 36 and 45. Palliative care home are specific to Quebec. These are community-driven organizations specialized in end-of-life care that resemble hospital long-term care units.
So what did we learn? There were 5 things that we will discuss in the next few minutes. First one, identifying the end of life. Now we're nearing the end. Nurses reported difficulties in the identification of the beginning of the end of life phase. Those difficulties were attributed to the clinical picture, which could vary greatly from one form of the disease to another and from one person to another. Also, the presence of symptoms or treatments associated with imminent end of life in patients with other terminal illnesses, such as severe cachexia or dysphagia, or the use of BPAP on an ongoing basis, sometimes several weeks before death, led to confusion in the identification of the end of life in people with ALS, as one nurse noted. You know, everyone has a different trajectory, no matter what the disease is. But my impression is that the ALS trajectory is different for everyone too. And it's like impossible for me to say, well, there's this much time left or there's that much time left. You know, I mean, there are symptoms that my oncology patients have that make me think they're not going to last long. My ALS patients are the same, but they're not at the end of life. So it expressed very, very well the fact that compared to patients suffering from other diseases, patients living with ALS presented symptoms associated with an imminent end of life, sometimes several weeks or even months before death. Despite those difficulties in the identification of the end of life, some signs were reported by nurses, including respiratory deterioration, increased difficulty in managing bronchial secretion, and the constant need to adjust medication, especially to manage dyspnea and secretion, without being able to reach a new stability. Finally, 4 nurses noted that in retrospect, the novel identification of difficulty digesting enteral nutrition, tube feeding, was the warning sign leading to death, be it in the form of a higher than usual gastric residual volume that persisted, or a reflux of gavage back in the mouth. Those with these signs all died within days of their being identified. Second, teams' communication issues, getting them to express their suffering in ways other than talking. ALS causes significant dysarthria, as you know. By the end of life, many people can no longer use speech, and they can no longer make signs also. This creates major communication challenges. Communication and understanding needs became a major challenge for the healthcare teams, which had an impact on the clinical assessment and support of people living with ALS at the end of life. However, those communication barriers particularly affected psychosocial assessments and related intervention, which left many nurses feeling helpless, as noted one nurse. Well, there's also the psychological side with the person, but there are barriers all the time because of communication problems. You know, what is a good therapeutic approach to take with someone who doesn't communicate 100% verbally? That's what gets complicated too, because you can't understand them. Well, some nurses were happy to just refer them to the social worker or psychologist when there was one available. Others were very involved in this aspect of care because they considered it important. Those nurses were able to develop a comfort with silence and to relate without the need for verbal communication and in order to support their patients. Third themes, supporting the need for control. That's what made her feel much safer. Nurses repeatedly mentioned that adhering to a routine was important for many people living with ALS at the end of life and for their relatives too. This strict routine took the form of precise steps in a specific order and using a set technique, all of which should not be deviated from. While some nurses said this need to maintain the same detailed routine as a rigid requirement without any basis, most nurses it as a means for people to maintain some control in a situation where their autonomy was greatly impaired. The need for control, expressed through a rigid routine, was also reassuring for the care team once they knew the routine, though. A nurse said she was someone who had extremely pre-established routine, so during the day, her partner knew her routine, and that's what made her feel much safer. At the same time, having this kind of routine also made the team feel more secure because since there was a communication issue, it allowed everyone to understand a little more where we were heading. Now to Myriam.
Accompanying a fight culture. Her mind hadn't reached the same stage than her body. This need of control sometimes take a form of desire to maintain care, intervention, and that are no longer appropriate. For example, eating normally in case of severe dysphagia, taking few steps despite the weakness, the severe and the excessive weakness that endanger both the person and the caregiver. That was observed more frequently on people living with ALS than other clientele. We asked the nurses how they explain this very strong desire to maintain these intervention care activities when they are no longer possible or safe. And they reply without hesitation, this is linked to the fight culture. So the fight culture made it more difficult to accompany also the patient with their unrealistic requests because the nurses don't want to be the bearer of the bad news. The fear of being the bearer of the bad news is however, not found on nurses that are more experienced palliative care nurses. So they are more comfortable with the idea of discussing difficult matters or more difficult subjects. So that was found only on nurses that are not experienced nurses. To continue with a verbatim of one of the participants, she said, well, I think that it's a kind of battle she's leading that caused her to grasp onto a great many things. And which means that we can do what we do with other patients who doesn't have the same condition. The next theme is the extent of the need for care, which we will call intensive palliative care. This title was suggested by one of the participants that linking care for person with ALS at the end of life to an intensive palliative care because of the scope of the care that are involved. Even we found that in Maison de Soins Palliatifs, which is a kind of palliative house, there is an unwritten rule that is only one, that we have only one patient with ALS that was admitted at the time. So if another patient with ALS was asking to be admitted in the walls of the maison, and then the file was automatically put aside because we want to protect and maintain the quality of care and also the team, the care team. So we understand that the care needs of people living with ALS is very great. To continue with the verbatim that one of the nurses share, she said the other nurses that was there, she was a regular and she knew very well the patient, had excellent bond with her, to the point that the nurse eventually had to say to the team, listen, I know I'm specialized and so, but right now I could use a break because it's a lot. Yes, because as soon as the patient was on the team, it's going to be a very busy night, evening for sure. If we continue with the 3 recommendations that those team leads to in the study, there is 3 levels of recommendation. The first one is organizational, the second one is research, and the last one is clinical. So for the first one, the organizational recommendation is to adjust the nursing-patient ratio when a person with ALS is in end of life to maintain the quality of care. In research, we need a better understanding of the hopes, fears, and needs of people living with ALS in the end of life, and explore also the issue faced by other members of the care team, not only nurses. Finally, clinically, we need to develop and adapt an existing tool that facilitate communication and clinical assessment of people living with ALS. In conclusion, we would like to leave that to one of the participants. And she said, I think that yes, it's a terrible disease, but I think that we have the means or the capacity as nurses to do wonderful things with these patients as well. You just have to take the time. Of course, experience help, but we have to take the time. Here is the QR code for the research. And on the behalf of Stéphanie, Etienne, and myself, I would like to thank you very much to have listened to this presentation. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. That was a fantastic talk, and I think having worked in a palliative care unit and worked with an amazing bunch of nurses, it's a very special job that you all do. So we've got a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone has any questions for these guys while they're online. I have a question. In what you called your maison, which is I think like a palliative care unit or a palliative care, which is what we would call a palliative care unit, do your nurses have specific training in caring for some of the special needs of people who are coming to the end of their life after living with MND ALS?
I'll go, Myriam. Well, no, and it's a problem. It was my first project when I graduated this project, and it came from my practice in this home, which we talked about with Etienne at first. And I was there for a few months, and I had a lot of patients, and it was a lot of cancer, and how do we say, like a heart disease. And when I had my first ALS, I had not a lot of knowledge, so that was what gave me the idea of this project, because we need to have more knowledge about that.
I think that's a fairly common scenario, certainly in Australia, that what we call palliative care units have all people coming to the end of their life, and it does cause a challenge for the nursing staff to need to have so many skills to work with a wide range of people. I'll just see if there's any other questions. No, you guys did so well. Thank you so much. If there's anything that you'd like to say at the end, hopefully we will hear from you more in the future. But I think there's a lot of fantastic nurses working with people with MND ALS throughout the world. So we all want you to keep it up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.